got a green light. The mic is on, okay? And we're going to do it that way, all right? They already come.
Good evening, everybody. Welcome to Sykes Ballroom. I am Jim Zulke, the Sports Information Director, and it gives me great pleasure to welcome you to Title IX Chat Through the Decades with our panel. I will introduce the Master of Ceremonies for this evening, Amy Fadool, NBC Sports Philadelphia anchor.
Thank you all. I am so honored to be here. The last time I was in this very ballroom, I was celebrating the retirement of one Deirdre Kane. That was exactly 7 years ago, which was really great. Or a little over 7 years, I guess, almost 8 years ago. So it's really nice to be back here. We've been back here a couple times, but not to Sykes. So it's really good to see everybody. Thanks for coming out to this wonderful discussion. It's hard to believe that it's been 50 years since Title IX, and sometimes it feels like it's been 5. But you're going to have some really interesting and cool and maybe hard to hear stories, I think, that these women are going to tell, and we're going to have some discussion at the end of it, and then we're going to open it up if you guys have any questions for any of our panel members as well. But I thought it would be appropriate to start by reading what Title IX is, and maybe you're familiar with it, but you don't know the exact language of it. But I thought that might be a good way to really kind of kick us off. So, Title IX. No person in the United States shall, on the basis of sex, be excluded from participation in, be denied the benefits of, or be subject to discrimination under any educational program or activity receiving federal financial assistance. That's Title IX of the Educational Amendments of 1972 of the 1964 Civil Rights Act. So did anybody hear the word sports in there? Or athletics? No, right? So it's interesting that that's where it's gone and how it really kind of has evolved. It was enacted in June 23rd, 1972. It doesn't get to be until 1975 that it starts actually really involving and having language about athletics and sports. So in 1978, the number of female high school student athletes had gone from 300,000 to more than 2 million. That's nationwide. And now, obviously, we're well beyond that. Similarly, though, women's collegiate sports participation doubled from 32,000 participants in 1971 to 64,000 in 1977. So that is just when you started seeing the fruition of the Title IX Act. 72 is when it was passed, 75 is when they changed the language. Obviously, it's all about federal funding and how that relates to college athletics, which is something we're going to get to in our discussions, and the different ways that it's been maybe kind of manipulated is probably the best way. And I think sometimes it takes on a negative connotation, Title IX, because it seems like it takes away and doesn't add to. So we're going to get into some of those, but I want to introduce our panel. We have, obviously, to chat through the decades. So we have somebody representing each decade, the 70s, 80s, 90s, 2000s, and 2010s. So we're going to get this discussion started in a moment, but I'm going to start with Deirdre Kane, who's also my mother-in-law. So if you wonder how I ended up here, I brought her. So I don't know how she even got here. She lettered in 4 sports throughout her high school career at Paul VI over in New Jersey in the early 70s. Then at the University of Dayton, she was a 3-sport star, became the first female to receive an athletic scholarship from the school at Dayton in 1975. Upon her graduation, she coached field hockey, basketball, and softball at the high school level until 1981, when she made the jump to the college ranks as an assistant at Salisbury State. Then elevated to head coach in 83. She held that position for 2 years until she moved to Swarthmore in 1985. 1 year at Swarthmore as the head coach, led to 1 year as an assistant at Penn, of course in the Ivy League. And then in 1987, she took the job as the head coach at Westchester University, where she would spend the next 26 years of her life, racking up 474 victories, 18 winning seasons, including 5 PSAC Eastern Division titles, 4 trips to the NCAA Division II tournament, 3 Regional Coach of the Year honors, and the Mother of the Year, I think all Sean would say. But Deirdre Kane. It's weird to hear it said like that, isn't it? She is the winningest coach, basketball, male or female, here at Westchester. I'll just add that little bit in there. Yes, shout out. So from the 1980s, Dr. Chris Karpinski, obviously right next to Deirdre. Dr. Karpinski is an exercise physiologist, registered dietitian, and board-certified specialist in sports dietetics. She is professor and chair of the Department of Nutrition here at Westchester University. She earned her BS at Westchester in exercise science, played field hockey and lacrosse. She earned her master's degree from Immaculata and her PhD from Rutgers with her doctoral research project involving athletes at Westchester University. In addition to her teaching and chair responsibilities, Chris has developed a comprehensive sports nutrition and fueling program as part of the Student Athlete Success Program here at Westchester. Under the supervision of Dr. Karpinski, a combination of undergraduate students, graduate students, and dietetic interns provide nutrition education and fueling for the athletes here at Westchester, and they also conduct research in our area. She's the editor-in-chief of Sports Nutrition, a handbook for professionals, 6th edition. She also has served as the chair of sports, cardiovascular, and wellness nutrition, dietetic practice in 2020 and 21, as a member of ACSM, Pines, and CPSDA. She can tell you what all of those mean. I'm sure the D and M mean dietetics. She's presented many times to many different groups on the topic of providing collegiate sports nutrition services on a budget, advocating for the critical need of sports dietitians in all college programs. She's currently collaborating with other sports RDs in the emerging area of research, food insecurity in collegiate athletes, which I think is really important, which may help support efforts to find funding for nutrition services for collegiate athletes. Let's give a nice round of applause for Dr. Chris Karpinski. Very accomplished. Our own Kelly Milner. She is the Associate Director of Athletics and Senior Women's Administrator at Westchester here, having served as the school's Senior Women's Administrator since coming to Westchester in 2007. She's a 1998 graduate of Villanova, a 4-year starter on the softball team, earning all Big East and all region honors as a Wildcat. She earned her master's degree from Temple in 2001 and her MBA from Drexel University in 2006. Kelly was the assistant softball coach at Drexel prior to becoming director of compliance back in 2001. While here at Westchester University, Kelly has been instrumental in the development of the Student Athlete Success Program and serves as the Deputy Title IX Coordinator for the Department of Athletics. She also co-chairs both the Sports Equity Committee and the Athletics Diversity Committee and Inclusion Committee. Outside Westchester, she serves as on the NCAA Committee on Women's Athletes and Social Justice Subcommittee. She has picked back up softball coaching, albeit under the 10 recreation level for her children, her 2 daughters, and I know they must be very proud to have you as their coach, and of course their mom, Kelly. Our 2000s is Maddie Evans. She's a native of Glenside, Pennsylvania. She's a former midfielder for the Orlando Pride in the National Women's Soccer League. She received her bachelor's degree in English from Penn State, a master's in organizational leadership from Concordia University, Chicago, and a master's in sports science, sport and exercise psychology from Lock Haven University. Maddie played college soccer for Penn State while she was captain her senior year. She helped lead the Nittany Lions to the program's first national championship game. Shortly after, she was drafted to play professionally for the Boston Breakers in the inaugural NWSL draft in 2013. She played for Boston for 3 seasons. Then she was acquired by Orlando in the expansion draft in 2015. She retired from professional soccer recently in 2017 after 2 years with Orlando and 1 in Brisbane, Australia. She is currently the assistant women's soccer coach and an adjunct faculty instructor here at Westchester. Maddie also facilitates leadership workshops for select student athletes through Michael Horrock's Leadership Institute. Formerly, she was the assistant coach at MIT and Concordia University, Chicago. She's passionate about nonprofit called Soccer Without Borders. And outside of soccer, her interests include leadership, team building, running, music, hiking, and traveling. Welcome, Maddie. And I cannot wait for you guys to hear how our next panelist came to be on this panel. It is the best story. I made her tell it to me, and I'm going to make her tell it again. So, Juah Toe, she's currently a master's student here, at the University of North Carolina, Greensboro, studying sport exercise psychology with a concentration in applied sports psychology. Juah graduated from Westchester in the spring of 2020. During her time here at Westchester, she was an honor student on the women's rugby team, where she served as captain for 2 years. She led the team to the national championship in the fall of 2019. She was nominated and became the NCAA Woman of the Year finalist in 2020 and the 2021 NCAA Today's Top 10 Award recipient. Outside of being an amazing student athlete, Juah heavily involved in campus and the Abbey Society, Honor Student Association, Omicron Delta Kappa, Psi Chi Honor Society in Psychology, residence life as a desk assistant in Goshen Hall. Juah, thanks for being here. Yes, wow is right. Wow is right. So I built it up a little bit. So Juah, I am going to start with you. Rugby is a sport that people, they don't really know much about. And you were among those people that didn't know much about it. So tell us how you came to be a part of the rugby team and lead them to so much success.
Okay. Can everybody hear me all right? Okay. So like she said, I did tell her my story just a little bit ago, but it was actually the summer 2016 Olympics, and I'm a big fan of sports all throughout high school and middle school. I did track, basketball, field hockey, cheered. Anything athletic that I could do, I was going to be a part of it. And so the summer 2016 Olympics, I was just watching, you know, track and field was over, gymnastics is over. I was looking for something new to watch. So I remember sitting on my bed, I'm flipping through the channels, and then I stop on this game, which I have no idea what it is. I just see this big green field. And I'm like, oh, soccer. I thought soccer was over already. They obviously zoom in to a play, and the girl like lays another girl out. And I'm like, okay, so this is not soccer. And so I'm waiting for the announcers to finally tell me what this sport is, and they're like, this is the final women's rugby. And what Juah didn't know in 2016 was I was watching the two of the best teams for women's rugby in the world playing, and then it was Australia versus New Zealand, which are two popular teams. And I got to watch the rest of that game, and that completely inspired me to chase after rugby no matter what the cost. So I tweeted about it to no one, really. And someone who I did track with in middle school and high school, she was actually running track here at Westchester, and I was already set to come to Westchester 2 weeks after the Summer Olympics. She says, I think Westchester has a team. I think it's just club, though. And I was like, oh, cool, yeah, I'll sign up. So I get here, I'm running around the involvement fair, trying to find the women's rugby table. I sign up, and they're like, oh, yeah, like, we're a Division I sport, like, all people can come. I said, Division who? Like, I'm just trying to walk onto, like, a club team. There's no club version of this? They're like, no, like, full varsity funded, school-funded program. I said, okay. So I sign up, I get my paperwork, and then I have 2 days of practice, and my coach can attest to this. 1 day to learn how to tackle, another day to learn how to pass, and then we're on the road to Sacred Heart for our first like away game of the season for me. And then they're playing very well. I'm just chilling, looking at this game like I'm seeing it in person for the first time, and my coach asked me, hey, you want to go in for the second half? I'm like, the second half, like 40 minutes? And you're already yelling at them and they're doing well the first half? Like, I'm good, coach, if you're all right with that. He puts me in, and that was my first ever game. It's on October 8th, and so that's probably a day that I'll remember forever. And then, obviously, like she said, we won a national championship in 2019, so I actually became captain the year before that in my junior year. So I only had 2 years of playing experience, and my teammates, some of them are here, trusted me to be one of 2 captains and then one of 3 captains the next year. And it actually came full circle for me because in the spring of my freshman year, I scored my first try at Harvard University, and then our national championship game was played at Harvard. And we won only in the second half. It was quite the game, if you know about it. We were down 0-14, had to pull us all together during halftime, came back to win the game 15-14 in the last 20 minutes, and then win our first program national championship. And like knowing that I started my rugby career scoring my first try at Harvard and then ending that 15 season also at Harvard really came full circle for me. I'm super blessed that rugby's in my life. It completely changed everything. I have been blessed with the best teammates. They have supported me through every single thing I've ever decided to join. If there was a new club I was joining, they were going to show up. If I was getting a new award, they were going to show up. And even now, I've graduated 2 years now, and there's a bunch of them in the room now. So I have been so blessed to have the best teammates, coach, athletic trainers, staff, and school to go to.
The story didn't disappoint. I knew it would. It's so good. But let's kind of go down the panel and talk about, so Deirdre, you have the unique aspect because you were pre-Title IX and then very slightly in Title IX. So why don't you tell us kind of how it changed for you? What was different that you saw, even if it wasn't from one year to the next, but from the beginning of your sports journey to where it became once you finished it at the collegiate level?
Well, I'll talk personally in a minute, but Juah is what Title IX is all about. A sport that wouldn't even exist for women, unless we needed to put more bodies out there because we had to meet the requirements for Title IX. So it's an amazing thing. And before I get personal again, going to the future, let's go to the past. I have to give a shout out to the women of the 50s and the 60s, although a lot of them aren't here. They were my coaches, and I know women personally and Westchester graduates, and I don't think I need to put them on blast by telling their names here, but if you want to know afterwards, I'll tell you. But I know women who lost their jobs as athletic administrators because they brought it up. No, this isn't fair, and they filed lawsuits, and they were blackballed and never got back into athletics because of it. So I need to give those women a shout out. I know a woman personally who gave me my first college coaching, full-time college coaching job at Penn. Everything was part-time until then. And she was the only woman in a crowd, and I'll mention his name, Bobby Knight, because there's no love there. So I will mention his name. She was the only woman at this Cherry Hill clinic, made famous later because he put somebody in a trash can, if you remember that story. But she was the only woman and asked a question. I don't remember what the question was, and part of his response was along the lines of, shouldn't you be home and in the kitchen? But what she had in that audience were male advocates who spoke up in her defense. And when I look around this room, I see male advocates. And there's actually a legend here, and I'd be remiss if I didn't introduce one of the legendary male advocates for women's sports for as long as I've been coaching on the college level, and that's Bob Schnorr from Downingtown High School. If you are the underserved population, you're never going to make it up to being the served population unless you have advocates from the other side. And we're thankful to all those men and all those women that preceded me. But when I started playing, there were 6 players on the court. We could only take 3 dribbles. We weren't allowed to cross half court. We wore dresses. There were no sports bras. You know, we had bloomers on. I could get into what else there weren't any of for feminine products that also made it very difficult to play. But it was just, and we didn't care. And we didn't feel oppressed because we just wanted to play. And the fact that I played 3 sports might make me sound like quite the beast of an athlete, but it was because I couldn't play any. I had to play all 3 because my field hockey coach was also the certified athletic trainer for basketball. This is on the college level at the University of Dayton, and she was also the softball coach. Now imagine that job description. And that's how things were. And our men were flying around out there playing UCLA, losing in triple overtime against Bill Walton, and we're riding around in station wagons singing songs, and we were happy. But it was our coaches who realized this wasn't fair, and our coaches, so the women that came before me that advocated. And to show you the difference, my junior year, we were playing against teams, University of Kentucky, Indiana, Ohio State, and we were competitive. Title IX was passed in 72, okay, now it's 75. Dayton gives one little scholarship, and they gave it to me because I played all 3 sports, so quick, let's give it to her. It's a Catholic school, so they didn't have quite the funding, but we were going to Ohio State and Kentucky and Indiana and getting our butts kicked because now they're in compliance. They're given scholarships, and they are finding the best players from all around. So it was really, really quite a transformation. And I was just born at the right time and happened to be there. I graduated from high school in 72, and Title IX was passed in 72. My team happened to win the state championship in 72. We just had a celebration for our coach, okay, who coached me at 72 on March the 12th over in New Jersey. And if anyone's around at Renault Winery on June 23rd, the exact day, President Nixon, by the way, President Nixon was the one that signed it. If anybody's at Renault Winery, there'll be a big celebration there. So June 23rd, 50 years later. But it was quite the transition that I lived through, and I just consider myself real lucky and consider two of the fruits of our labor.
Chris, you were in the 80s, but it wasn't like Title IX was everywhere. You know, you still were having to deal with a lot of obstacles in the funding and the equality of it all. Why don't you tell us about your experiences?
Well, interesting. You can see things were getting better. You could, because I will tell you very similar stories, but you'll see a slight improvement, slight transition. So, for example, I didn't have to play 3 sports, but I had to play 2 sports to get my scholarship. My scholarship was based on me playing both field hockey and lacrosse, even though really lacrosse was really my sport, but I was penned in to play both sports. And if I wanted to just play lacrosse, then I would lose my scholarship. So I had to play both sports all 4 years. When I think of the uniforms were recycled for both field hockey and lacrosse, the same uniforms for both teams. And I'm sure over the 4 years, probably there was a point where we probably got new uniforms, but I can't quite remember. I remember the skirts, they were very heavy because we got one skirt and they were reversible. One was for home games and the other side was for the away games. And I really always remember that my skirts, my kilts, never fit. We just moved the buttons. We just sewed the buttons. And so I always remember that. I think about locker rooms. And I know Starzabecker is going to be undergoing this wonderful renovation where we're going to have, from what I understand, new locker rooms. And you know, all teams are going to have locker rooms. I can't say that we didn't have a locker room. If we did, we used it as a storage room because we didn't use it. Like the girls today, the women's teams today, most of them do have a locker room and they use it. They each have individual lockers and they use it as a team building area where they meet and they get psyched before games and such. We didn't have that. We didn't have those locker rooms. We were down on the lower fields. We were still playing on grass at the time. And we would just all meet down there. We didn't have the locker rooms. I don't know if the guys did. I didn't really pay attention to that. So I don't know if they had locker rooms. I just know we didn't. We didn't have locker rooms. You know, I actually got certified as a student. I got certified as a paid, I guess, student worker or something because I actually had to drive the vans to away games. So again, I don't know in comparison to the guys, I don't know that because again, you're just so locked into what you're doing, but I actually had to drive to away games. Imagine I had to then play a game. Now I'm exhausted from giving it all in a game and then I had to drive my teammates back. You know, so these types of things that just weren't quite right, but they were just, as Deirdre said, we just did what we had to do. You know, we did what we did. So improvement from what some of the stories that Deirdre are sharing with you, improvement, slight improvement, but just not, obviously not quite where you would think, you know, it should be.
I think that that's probably the case even now, 2022, which is disappointing. Every year it's just a little bit better instead of making these. I can go ahead. I wasn't there, but there's no way there was a men's soccer player driving the rest of his team around. There's just no way. I refuse to believe that. I don't think that happened. But Kelly, why don't you, as the representative from the 90s, now you're 20 years in, right? And you're thinking things must be getting better. But that's not necessarily true, right?
Yeah, and I was thinking about this because I'm, as you can see, the middle child here. And when I got to Villanova, we had a field that didn't have a fence, that didn't have dugouts. It had just been skinned, which means it was grass infield in the fall, and then the spring they finally put the dirt infield. And that's where I started playing. And my coach at the time was part-time. Deirdre, you mentioned part-time. My head coach was part-time. My assistant coach was part-time. And then throughout after my first year, we had a new field. They built a new field. By the time I was a junior, our head coach was a full-time coach. So it kind of felt like these changes were happening, and I didn't think I realized it at the time, but they were happening while I was there. Mm-hmm. And I also, you know, learned later on that we had one scholarship when I was a freshman, and then by the time I was a senior, several of us were on scholarship. Mm-hmm. So it was very interesting how things changed, and I just kind of went with it. And like Chris said, you're in your bubble, and I definitely drove our team around too. We did that. But I just find it, kind of looking back at it now, I mean, now they have a whole new field and a whole stadium. It's a whole different experience. But just those changes while I was there between 1994 and 1998 were pretty dramatic now that I look back on it.
Shout out to the women drivers, by the way. Very well done by you guys. Very well done. Maddie, so you're in the 2000s, and you were born in the 90s, so you don't know what it was like. So, you know, obviously, when I was born, and when you're younger than I am, but there was no pre-Title IX in our minds. We don't know people that didn't have a women's sports program. Right? It's unusual to think, oh, there's a college that didn't have a women's sports program. That is something normal. But for you, as a woman going through the athletic process, it still wasn't where it is now or where it could be. how was your experience when you kind of started to navigate the collegiate sports landscape?
So for me, I guess to put it in perspective, during my senior season, we were celebrating the 40th anniversary of Title IX. So obviously more removed, or further removed from this implementation. So for me, I am certainly reaped the benefits of the work that was put in before. The dream for me to play collegiate sports was made very early on. It was a dream of mine to go play college soccer in elementary school. And I knew what that looked like. I knew an idea of what programs existed. I knew what types of coaches I wanted to play for. So that dream was a reality for me. And the experience that I had there, and it's kind of easy for me to compare as far as my experience to the men's. My now husband was a soccer player at Penn State the same 4 years that I was. And I can say that our experiences as far as facilities and coaches and full-time staff and support was equal. So I am extremely fortunate for the women here, and my lens too is also primarily through soccer. So there are many strong women, and I want to give a shout out to the head coach of my program, Betty Ann Kemp-Townsley, who is here tonight, who is a legend and a pioneer in the women's soccer world, who really helped create some of the opportunities that I had as both a player and now as a female coach.
I think that's really important. Shout out Betty Ann. Betty Ann, yes, there you go. You mentioned the dream, and it was never not a thought. It wasn't ever like, oh, okay, I can't do that. Of course it was. You'd seen it. You had seen it. And we were talking, Juah and I were actually talking about this. Who saw the commercial during some of the Final Four in the NCAA men's and women's basketball where they talked about women's sports, the Buick commercial, right? And I think it was eye-opening to a lot of people. I don't think they realize how underrepresented women's sports are. I mean, I gave you those numbers. Those numbers are from the 70s. And if you thought that there was something happening, there was a sport where there was only 2 million people, that would be still everywhere. But it's obviously, I mean, you're talking about tens of millions of girls playing this. And there are numerous studies that are out there about the drop-off from when girls turn 12 to 14 and the lack of participation at the high school level. But the more girls like Maddie and Juah see people on the stage, women, men supporting women, then you get that participation level to remain. I think that was really eye-opening to me when they run those numbers about the 40%. And then the drop-off, that's disappointing. Juah, you mentioned that you played sports all the way through, so it was part of your life. Did you ever feel that there was a moment, well, it's not really a girly thing to do is to play rugby. Like, I mean, that's, when you grow up, it's one thing to be a cheerleader or a dancer or play tennis or something like that, but that's some of the worry, I think, when people are talking about women's sports is that, it's not the most feminine thing, even though they dominate, right?
Right. And, who's to define what's feminine, am I right? So that is a common thing that comes up in women's rugby. Obviously, it's a tough sport. Some might say it's harder than football. We don't have pads, if anybody hasn't ever seen a rugby game, so we just hit each other like skin on skin, And so for us in rugby, that's something that we talk about, is that the great thing about our sport is that every type of person is needed in order to play rugby. So it's not like most sports, they might favor a certain body type, or you need to work this skill from when you were 2 until you actually go to the Olympics or play at a collegiate level. For rugby, like me, you can walk on, and it's kind of we'll take you as you are, you'll learn the skills, and you'll be the best rugby player you can be. And so in our community, that is something that we harp on a lot, is that you need every size, you need height, you need girth, you need big mamas to run people over, you need your quick people to get by people, you need your kickers, your former soccer players. And I think that's the beauty of rugby, is that it brings everyone together, because it's not the one sport, but the one sport where you kind of feel if I come to you, I'm going to feel accepted, and I'm going to play this sport to whatever ability that I have. If I'm a kicker, there's a spot for you. If you used to be a sprinter, there's a spot for you. If you really just stiff arming people, there is a spot for you. We can hold that space for you, and we'll give you the ball. And so that's a really exciting part of our community in rugby. And also going on to the media thing, I started rugby because I saw it on TV, and that we also kind of talked about this a little bit, is that it had to happen at the most like right moment, that I happened to be sitting on my bed. I happened to be going through these TV channels to find something else to watch where women were being athletic. And then also already going to a school that happened to have a rugby program at the varsity level, who were going to accept me, teach me the game, and then really push me to be like an All-American, to be a national champion, like, and be recognized nationally, I guess, as like a woman in sport. And so I think media, like, we have stars now, especially since the last Olympics that just went on, like Alona Mar blew up women's rugby on TikTok because she was just sharing her experience. And I think women's sport just need to be highlighted more. I currently work with a Division I lacrosse team, and like at the beginning of the season, they were so excited because women's lacrosse was now going to be aired on ESPN. And it's 2022, and they can't even watch other teams play unless you like are at that school. You like find some sketchy YouTube video. And so it's 2022, and these Division I lacrosse players are excited that their sport is just being shown on ESPN. And that, for them, is very exciting, but it's also so exciting for the little girls that now can just be like, Mom, like, I want to watch lacrosse, like, put it on the TV. And you're like, okay, yeah, it's on this channel this day. And so I'm really excited about the future, because obviously a lot of things have gone on, and now we kind of get to reap the fruits of those hard work before us. And so I've been really blessed with the team and our program here with the things that we've gotten. One thing is we do not have a locker room, so we are working on that. But some things have changed, but there's definitely still more improvements to come. And also in rugby, we have a saying, leave the team better than you left it. Or then you found it. So for me, in 2016, how I found it, my goal was by 2020 to leave it better than I found it. And then obviously that's passed down to the people who are here now. And even as you graduate and leave, I think it's also important to remember, like, giving back to the same community that you wanted to see thrive while you were an athlete. So one of my biggest goals is, get rich and famous and spend all my money on these girls when the time comes.
I love it. Thank you, Juah. You talked about seeing it on TV. I do want to give a little shout out. There are some young girls here, Tessa and Paige, and they're wearing Sixers gear, which is awesome. So it's, shout out Tessa and Paige. When I was growing up, I wanted to be a sports broadcaster. I played sports. I was not athletically as gifted as any of these women up here, though I think I might have liked hitting people, so maybe I should have played rugby.
I think everyone should try it.
They should at least try it, right? But my mom she said you could absolutely be a sports broadcaster. There was Leslie Visser was the only woman on television watching sports, and you need to have those people that encourage you, right? You need to be able to see it, and then you need to have someone behind you. And I thought about when, Maddie, you were talking about how you wanted to play since you were in elementary school. Everybody remembers Team USA in soccer, right? In 1996, I mean, that was 92, 96. The World Cup stage was just so massive with them. And then you got to play, because they did the fruits of the labor, you got to play professional women's soccer. Did you think in any way, that's something that I didn't know would ever happen. Did you think when you were in college that you would be able to play soccer at the professional level?
So I remember sitting in my living room, cross-legged, 3 feet away from the television in 1999 as an 8-year-old, watching the 99ers win the World Cup, and Brandy Chastain rips off her shirt. And I'm running circles around our living room, thinks it's the greatest thing in the world. And it was I go home and help my mom and dad pack up their house. I find little things I drew of when I grow up, I want to be a professional soccer player. So while the dream wasn't clearly defined yet as far as what that league would look like, what that would actually look like, there was hope for me watching that, and also seeing so many players kind of creating that pathway for me. So while it wasn't clearly defined, I knew that it could be a reality, and sure enough, it became one. So
I mean, it's truly amazing to think you had that dream, and that it wasn't even really a question. You're like, God, it's going to happen. It wasn't some kind of like little kid saying, I'm going to go to space. You actually, it was a tangible thing you could really touch on. And I think that's really important, because so many people watch different women's sports and they think, I can do that. And I think that that's really important when you see that. I kind of want to get into, I don't want to call it the dark side, but maybe what is a perceived negative of Title IX. And maybe, Kelly, you can speak to this, Chris and Deirdre, and you guys even as well, Maddie and Juah. But when I first started being exposed to sports and how it's covered, I went to a major university, and it was, well, Title IX, if we're in compliance, that means that men's sports have to go. So you start seeing, baseball go by the wayside. Men's wrestling is a really popular one to get cut. Swimming and diving. It was always men's, and you're thinking, well, that's kind of strange. You're supposed to be equal. Football obviously throws all of that out of whack, and when you go to a large SEC school, it really throws it out of whack. So I think I had maybe a negative connotation of Title IX initially, thinking when I was doing my sports kind of management type of classes. But Deirdre was one that opened my eyes on how it really worked. So why don't you kind of address the fact that it can have a negative connotation, but it's not the principle of Title IX, it's how it's really kind of managed at different school levels.
Absolutely. And for the SEC, I would say it's a disgrace the way it's managed, because the purpose or the intent of Title IX is to create opportunities for women, not to take away opportunities for men. And yes, hard decisions have to be made, but mostly fundraising and utilization of funds. And making sure that you're satisfying. There's a three-prong. I'll let Kelly get into that, all the NCAA jargon with that. But to me, that was always the intent. If a school drops a men's sports just because they're trying to make their numbers work, to me that's the easy way out. And I think the institution should be held accountable for that. Create opportunities for women. Find the money. Don't just cut men's sports. That's lazy to me.
And it truly is. And I was telling some of the panel when we were speaking before this, I just saw this article recently about how the SEC has revenue sharing for all their bowl games. And right off the top, millions and millions of dollars each year to every single SEC university, which is 14. Like $6 million right out of the gate. Vanderbilt hasn't gone to a bowl game in 15 years. They got $6 million right away. So it is, to Deirdre's point, just an irresponsibly lazy way to do it, of like, oh, I guess we can't have men's tennis anymore because now we have women's tennis, women's soccer, women's volleyball, whatever, because the numbers won't. So Kelly, before we go any further, why don't you give us what the three-prong kind of statute is that has to satisfy for Title IX?
Yeah, and it's the, obviously, well, it's the Department of Education. Proportionality is the big one. So you are supposed to have a proportionate amount of student athletes, women student athletes as women in the university or the school, and then men student athletes to the men in the school. And that is, for example, at Westchester, we are about 60% women and 40% men. We are not proportionate in our athletes because we're about 50-50 in our athletes. Now, if you notice, we have more women's sports than men's sports, but you look at the roster sizes with football and different sports, so it's really, you're looking at bodies, not necessarily number of teams. So that's one that is very difficult. And I will say, I used to work at Drexel University, it was always a very interesting, well, we don't have to worry about Title IX. Why do you have to not worry about Title IX? We don't have football. We don't have football, and it's an engineering school, which has changed, and that whole thing is a whole other conversation. Yeah. But so they just never really thought about it, so I thought that was pretty interesting. But the other thing is, if you are offering sports on your campus that women want to play, and you do that by surveying your students, not your student athletes, all of your students, are we offering the sports that people are interested in playing? Are they good enough to play at the varsity level that we're offering? And that's really how we do it here. We survey all of our incoming freshmen, and we list all the sports that are available in the NCAA, whether we sponsor them or not. Do you want to play them? Are you good enough to play at the varsity level? And we get the response where the sports that we offer are the ones that students typically want to participate in. And the other thing that you need to be doing is equitable. There's a whole, they call it the laundry list, but things like equitable locker rooms, equitable uniforms, equitable travel. These are just some examples. There's a whole, and I think we've heard some of these stories how this was definitely not the case. I don't want to say back in the old days, but
back in the day.
And we still, as Juah mentioned, have issues with that because you're working with facilities that are older. So decisions about facilities, as you build things, as your campus changes, those are things that we have to take into account when we're looking at our new building that hopefully we're going to be having soon, and everybody's getting a locker room. Like, those are very intentional decisions that we make with the changes that happen on campus, and and I think we try to do a pretty good job. As far as equity, it may not be the best high level of everybody's traveling, but everybody's traveling the same. So I think that and that's really what everybody is trying to aim for. And I'm speaking for Westchester, not necessarily some other institutions,
But it's a constant thing. It's a constant concern. You're always having to think about it. I don't want to badmouth football because we do have the Westchester football coach. I love Coach Bill Swan. Where is he? Football, he's an advocate. He's obviously here. So I don't want to make it seem it's not the football's fault. It's the administration's fault. But Chris, you were going through it as obviously you've been on a couple different sides with this. But when you hear people say, Title IX, and they're like, oh, well, that's the only reason a woman got a scholarship, or that's why my son's tennis program was, like, does that irritate you? Because it has sometimes a negative connotation.
Honestly, I haven't really experienced that. I haven't had a lot of experiences that. I do work with the athletes, but, as a faculty member, I haven't had really that much experience with that, and working with, and then personally, again, back when I was playing, we just didn't have that. I don't know if we were really aware of what was going on back then, so no, I haven't had that, I haven't had the experience, and again, I think that, the experience here at Westchester, like Kelly is saying, the experience here at Westchester might be very different than a lot of other schools. Again, I think of the Division I schools, I hate to say it, the schools with a lot of money, I think that they have a lot more trouble and a lot more issues to deal with than schools like Westchester and schools that have, budgets that are just a lot more sound and a lot more, they don't have as much to get in trouble with, do I say?
Yeah. That's a really good point, honestly.
That's the truth.
Because when you're dealing with large, 53-man rosters and these budgets, that's a whole can of worms.
I'll give you an example, if you don't mind. I was thinking about this because one of the talking points that were put out there was kind of like, what's something that we could possibly think that might be coming next that would be a potential problem with Title IX, and I was thinking about this whole issue of how we are now potentially the rule that was passed that we can pay our college athletes. And the whole image, whatever that
NIL.
is.
Name, image, likeness.
The whole NIL thing. And I'm thinking about this. Now, again, at Westchester, I don't think we have to worry about that a whole lot. But we do. I said that facetiously, because we do have to worry about that. And I was thinking about this, and I did read a little bit about this, and that is something that I think, again, that's, I think, kind of the next wave of a Title IX issue that we have to worry about amongst all the other things. We do have to worry about that, because the reality is the male athletes we're going to have to worry about this with the male athletes. They're going to be the ones that are going to get paid. It's not so much, and no offense to the soccer players and all the wonderful female, popular players, but it's going to be the male athletes. So the male athletes are getting paid, and they're reaping the NIL. That's an equity issue. Yeah. So this is going to be the next thing that has to be dealt with from a Title IX standpoint. And even just something like if someone goes and talks to a male team about this issue, we have to talk to the female teams about this issue and so on. So I think that was something that I was thinking about.
That's a really good point, because the NIL, while a wonderful idea and something a long time coming, I will ask a quick trivia question. Deirdre, you're not allowed to answer. Does anybody know who signed the most lucrative NIL this year in college athletics? Deirdre, you're not allowed to answer. Yes, who do you think it is? She's male or female. Paige Becker's the top male or female with Gatorade. Shout out Wikipedia. Good retention there. So obviously she plays for UConn, and that's also to Chris's point where UConn women's basketball is on the level of a men's team. I mean, you go up there, and their regional final was in Bridgeport, Connecticut. They were the 2 seed. NC State was the 1 seed, and they're like, I think we have 6 fans over there in the entire arena. So to your point, how do you go to a large university and have the equitable distribution of NIL opportunities? I'm not even talking about money, just opportunities. If you have the men's basketball team that is, whatever, it's won national championships, and then you have the women's basketball team, very gifted, but not on that level. Men's football, there is no, obviously, correlation. So when we talk about why football puts everything out, when Kellianne was talking about the proportionality and different representation, football, you have 53 on the roster. Bill, how many do you have? 98. There you go. 98 student athletes on the football. There's not a women's sport that has 9. It would be awesome if there was, but there's not. Deirdre, how many did you have on your team?
Much to a lot of people's chagrin, too many, but cutting.
Some of them are here, so.
17.
17. And how many on scholarship?
2.5.
2.5. So there you go. So that's what we're talking about. So when we talk about how football puts everything so out of whack, that's one of the reasons why, because it's not there. So Bill, how many are on scholarship of your 90 plus?
We have 8.5 scholarships total.
To spread.
But we have about 55 people get money.
That are getting some kind of scholarship money. So that's really what we're looking at. So when you're thinking about how the disparity is. So when it comes to navigating the NIL, you're going to see something very similar, if not even more so, out of whack.
May I ask a question? The NIL is not institutional money, though.
No.
So is the institution going to be held accountable?
You know what? Nobody really knows that. Yeah, that's what's crazy. Yes, absolutely.
Sorry, I'm not supposed to be asking the questions, but.
It's interesting, though, but that brings up a good point, because it's not going to be university regulated, but at the same time, these are university student athletes. So it's a gray area that they passed it, because I don't know if anybody knows how this came to be. It was Ed O'Bannon, 1998, the UCLA basketball player. He started it because he, like many athletes, they would go to the school or the stores around the school and be like, there's an Ed O'Bannon jersey and it's selling for $150, and Ed's thinking, well, I don't get any money of that, and I don't get anything. I mean, obviously he gets a scholarship, and that's really kind of how it came to be, and it went all the way up to the Supreme Court. But so when you think about how that is probably the next step as far as navigating that, we don't really know how it's going to be affected. But there are different things that are going to come. I want to go back to something, Maddie, you went to a large university, right? You went to Penn State. We're talking Big Ten, massive. How many, 109,000 at Beaver Stadium?
Yeah, 110.
110, I don't want to shortchange you, I'm sorry, 110. So did you feel any of the kind of, I don't know, the Title IX like backlash? Because you said your husband Brian,
Yes.
he played men's soccer there too. Did you guys feel any of that because you have such a large football presence and participation, and obviously when they have, I mean, they have 50 plus all on scholarship.
As a fully funded program and Division I program in that experience, no, I did not feel that. So again, very fortunate for that experience. But and I think it is, so every school is going to be a little bit different depending on what stage it is, what conference, what the funding is like. So while yes, I was able to have that experience, fully aware that there's still a lot of work to be done, and a lot of work that was done for me to have that. But as far as the parallels between what I experienced as a woman on campus versus what the men's teams were experiencing, even what the football was experiencing as far as amenities and food and everything, it felt very equal.
Is men's soccer fully Big Ten?
Yes.
Okay, because sometimes you see they have to go to different conferences because their conference isn't fully functioning as that. And I know you've experienced that even at the PSAC level, where they don't fully experience the PSAC level too.
Yes, and I think too, part of it is, I mean, yeah, they got chartered flights. Like there's stuff that the football players were getting that we weren't. So definitely some disparity, but I guess again, maybe in my lens, it was. I felt like so much was given to me that it was probably hard to start comparing as well.
Yeah. I want to now, we've got a couple more up here, but I didn't know if anybody out there had any questions. If you have any questions, Jim has a microphone, which he is going to bring. So if you just want to raise your hand, he'll come around. Anybody have any, here you go. We got a question right here. If you just want to wait for the mic. If you want to introduce yourself too, that way we can address you.
Hi, my name is Joanne Finnegan. So on the Penn State question, because I was actually, before you. So I was there in the late 70s and early 80s, and I played on the golf team.
Two sports.
Golf team.
Golf team, okay.
Yeah. And at that point, even though Title IX had been around for a very long time, when I was there was $9,000 worth of scholarships. When I left, the year after I left, there was $90,000 of scholarships. Penn State was very slow. I love them, but they were very slow to implement. And your question about how did it feel? So what we were getting on campus as that was happening, and I was glad I was leaving, was, oh, did you hear? Men's bowling just got bumped. And I mean, there were a number of men's sports that got either downsized or exited, and there was definitely a negative connotation to what that was about, because then the women's sports were going to get more money. The other thing is we drove long distances in vans, through the night, and the men's teams were all flying airplanes. So it was very, very different, and we did know it. Yeah. We could see it with what was going on. And I talked to some of them now, and they have no clue, because it's all very equal now, but not back then.
Thank you for sharing, because it is interesting to hear examples, because this isn't that long ago. We're not talking about something from the 40s and 50s. This is literally 20, 30 years ago. You have a question?
I'm Fran Baliotti. I was a public school teacher for 35 years and kept score for my husband, Bob Schnorr.
were you a teacher out in Downingtown as well?
Yes.
Nice.
But my question, I have a question and then a follow-up, sort of. But anyway, my question is it true that you have to be a person who has particularly suffered in order to grieve a Title IX violation? And the reason I'm asking, I'll just go on to why I'm asking. In our middle school programs, the girls' basketball is not the same as the boys' basketball in terms of how many games they play, how much time they have, how much practice. None of it is equal. And when you ask an athletic director, they tell you that, well, that's the way it is at all the schools in the league, the same number of games and whatever. So I went and looked up all the Title IX things, and it appears to me that you have to be a person who suffers from the lack of equity in order to fight it. And of course, the problem in a junior high that has 2 grades is by the time somebody figures out, a parent, a player, I guess a coach could, but they're done. They're out. They're moved on. So that's why I'm trying to check to make sure that is actually, is that correct?
I don't want to be wrong, but I'm not sure that is correct. I don't think it is correct. I think if somebody is seeing this injustice happening, I believe they can reach out to the Department of Education to file a grievance. Now, again, if I'm wrong,
no,
but I think that's the case.
So a bystander who could
anybody? Yes, you could.
I could.
Yes, especially if it's continuing. You didn't just notice this.
No, this
today.
Was just a few years, just a couple of years ago. It was, because I haven't been back to a game since. Yeah, and I also wanted to point out that in a public high school, it took over 20 years after the Title IX went into effect for a girls basketball coach to be paid the same as the boys basketball coach, and he coached a month longer every year.
That's right. Because he won. You left that part out, but we'll add it for you. That's a really good point, too.
While Jim's moving the mic, let's point out that it was passed in '72, and our lovely governing body, the Ncaa, did not offer women's championships until '82. 10 years.
Hi, my name's Eli DeHope. I played for Temple in the late 70s, so I did absolutely see the craziness. We played on a 2/3 field, regulation size, to practice. We were not allowed in the training room. We were not allowed in the weight room. By my senior year, we were. So we saw the transitioning, but you're exactly right. It's amazing. We had AIAW back in the day. What I am I'm kind of looking at the broadcaster here. We live in a very popular market for sports. I have to tell you on a regular basis, my colleagues here are probably going to cringe when I say this, but I write the folks who broadcast, because Serena Williams could win the most, the greatest, the best of something, and you don't even see it. It shows up not a bit. And I was pleased with the March Madness that the women got, broadcasters that were female, but I'm so disheartened because when I go to other parts of the country, even small markets, women's sports is covered. High school women's sports is covered. In Philadelphia, one of the leading markets in the country, I'm really baffled by it because it's a self-fulfilling prophecy, because then no women are seen, and then what you get is, and I'm sorry, this is more of a commentary, but what you end up getting is, I think, young girls not seeing the value, and men saying, well, I don't know why that sport's not popular. Mm-hmm. And you're like, because no one shows you how popular it could be. I think women's soccer is a good example of that, where the dynamic efforts of the women professional players who really pushed for equality, at least in paycheck and things like that. So I throw that out because I got to see the evolution of this. Temple did file a lawsuit. My colleague Bev and I were on field hockey and lacrosse, and there was a lawsuit that was filed in the early 80s that tried to push along Title IX and hold accountable some of the programs. But it's just the media part, too, that also has to catch up.
It does. And it's, and your point about being here in Philadelphia as opposed to a small market. So I haven't always worked in Philadelphia. I started right out of college in Lexington, Kentucky, which is a smaller market. High school sports are king there. High school sports are the college level, and then the college there, University of Kentucky, is treated as the pros. You don't really talk about the pro teams there. So they have the Sweet 16, they call it. That's their state championship. It dominates women's, girls, and boys. And you get to be here, and if it's not the Eagles, Phillies, Flyers, or Sixers, it just isn't covered. And it's kind of like a little bit of an analogy with how you were talking about how, Drexel doesn't have to worry about it, and we don't have to worry about it at Westchester because it's not the thing. But at Penn State and at Kentucky and at UCLA, they do worry about those things. It's that same kind of analogy. When you get to be the larger stage, everything gets crowded out. And it makes people think that there's not that interest, which is not true. Deirdre can attest to this. My husband, who also works at the same station, we beat the drum to at least show college basketball. And even then, our drum is drowned out every year until Villanova goes all the way to the Final Four. And it's like, well, maybe we can get 20 seconds of highlights today. So we try to tell those stories. We're doing that more and more, trying to get it on the local level, at least with NBC 10, which is the local television station. But to your point, when I was working in Lexington or even in Baltimore, Maryland, high school sports were huge, girls and boys, and you get to be at this level and you just don't see it. And it's just because that hole that you have that you shove your sports in, which is usually only 3 minutes because that's where we're treated, and that's just fine, it's shoved out by the Eagles. It's something remarkable has to happen, right? Plymouth Whitemarsh needs to go 38-0 in their women's basketball, girls basketball. Then they're going to get a shout out for 20 seconds, which is disappointing. And that's the only time you hear about it, or something bad happens, which is awful. So to your point, it's something that needs to be addressed. It's not even addressed in the local papers. You go to the Inquirer, you barely see it. I was just talking to Deirdre about this website that I discovered when I moved here years and years ago, and now it's really kind of coming to the forefront, City of Basketball Love, and they really serve the high school basketball fan and the local college basketball fan. And that's just it's not even a niche, it's a really big fan base. And it's disappointing that in Market 4, which in the nation, the 4th largest market here in Philadelphia, you don't see the representation until something really big happens. You have to get all the way to the Final Four. You have to go undefeated and win the states. Then you get maybe a shout out. So to your point, I wholeheartedly agree when you think about that. But I think it is an analogy for how things go. I don't want to keep everybody. Is there any other? I don't want to. Yes, you have a question right here. Okay, you just.
Hi, I'm Lindsay Keenan. My question is for Juah Toe, And this is only because I know her, and so I know that she'll hopefully feel comfortable answering this, and if not, just call me out. But I think it's important that we're also having conversations about diversity along with gender. And as a powerful black woman who has just been so successful on and off the field, can you speak to your experiences in particular as a student athlete of color, and how, in particular as a woman student athlete of color, and how that may have been different than your white peers?
Thank you, Lindsay. Best AT out there, by the way. So, like she said, you know, I was probably, for the majority of my 4 years, either one of two black women on my team or the only kind of phasing out toward my senior year. It definitely is different being surrounded by people who don't look like you. Your athletic staff don't look like you. The people, you know, your medical staff also don't look like you. And I think that it is really important to talk about, you know, especially sports that are predominantly white, like why don't we have more, you know, black or people of color in those sports? And it's actually an amazing story that just happened this past fall, is that HBCUs are now having women's rugby. So a new team just started at Howard, and I know the coach and from other teams, and that's been like a very powerful movement for me to see, because obviously I came to Westchester and I happened to join a team, but knowing that teams are being created for this exact reason has been like the highlight of my post-college career. I know that it can be really hard to feel like you belong just as a person, let alone an athlete, especially if you're in a sport that, you know, your teammates, you can love them to death, but like, do they know what it feels like to be a black woman in sport? Especially when it comes back to that question earlier about like femininity. Like, black women are also very, very, very criticized on how they look. And obviously rugby is a sport where like, I want to be big, I want to be strong, I want to be so fast and so strong and stiff arm the crap out of people. But, which I do very well, thank you. But then also in society, like, I have to look how I look. And so, you know, already being criticized for how I look as a black woman, I look too manly, and then doing it on purpose, you know, they don't like that. And that's like their business at that point. But it is really difficult hearing the comments and having to experience it, like, oh, like, you might not find a man, you know, you'll never get married because you don't look a certain way. It's like, well, the right person's going to love me, and that's, at the end of the day, like, that's what I'm concerned about. And so thank you, Lindsay, for that great question, because that is a, like, important part that, you know, we talk about women in sport, but we also need to talk about black women in sport, and also just people of color in sport. And I know it differs, but like from team to team, because obviously some sports are more predominantly people of color, which is really awesome. But yes, my experience has been really great at Westchester, but I know that is not the experience of every black woman in any other sport that could be predominantly not their race, ethnicity. Thank you.
It does bring out, you know, some interesting things, because when you are a woman in sports, you inherently take on, for whatever reason, a masculine quality. It doesn't matter. People just assume. How many times, like, oh yeah, you know, she plays like a boy. No, what? No, she plays like a girl, because girls are also really good at sports. But you always heard that. Oh, she's a tomboy. Like, okay, what? I don't even know what that sentence means anymore. It's beyond offensive. It's just strange. So, you know, when you're coming up and playing it, it was accepted for me, but it still was kind of like you're the tomboy. And I know, Deirdre, you had it because you had to play with the boys because there weren't any women around there. But I want to go down the panel and kind of talk about your experiences of just even getting into sports. Not necessarily Title IX, because I think that that's really big. There's always going to be those naysayers to say, not Bobby Knight, but just get in the kitchen, you know, put the skirt back on type of thing. Even though you did wear a skirt playing sports for you. And so did you, Chris.
No, I did not. Your kilts.
You had to wear kilts?
Yeah.
Or field hockey and lacrosse?
I played field hockey in high school. I felt that reversible kilt when you described it. I knew it. It was plaid on one side and plain on the other.
I had to try my best to forget it.
I thought a tomboy was a compliment. Like, you know, and it was fortunate for me that I was in a major city. I grew up in South Philadelphia. And obviously, I was born in '54, so I'm in South Philadelphia in the '60s, thinking I can play in the schoolyard. My grandmother used to yell because they did shirts and skins, and if I was on the skins, the shirt came off, and I didn't see anything wrong with that, but apparently my grandmother did. But it was way before there would be any reason not to have your shirt off. But, and it was a metropolitan city where I took advantage of every rec program that Philadelphia had. And I played Little League. There was no fuss. It was before the fuss came that, oh, she's taking the spot of a boy. They were just like, can you play? Get in there, you know.
Who pushed you into it?
Who? I think it was just living across from the court and seeing all the kids. My dad was a coach. My dad was a football coach. My mom was not athletic at all, but my dad absolutely pushed me into it. And my parents were 45 when I was born, so they were just like... And my older sisters played. And my one older sister coached our CYO team, and I was only in second grade when she took over, and they were like, well, if you're coaching after school, Deirdre's going with you. So, you know, they gave me a little uniform in second grade just so I would think I belonged. So it was definitely older sisters and my father. But I never felt like, it was just always a part of my life.
Joe Kinley, everyone. Thank you, Joe. You can say that with a microphone if you want. He gave a shout out for Deirdre. 26 years. She was an advocate for so many women here. And some of her former players are here, too.
Thank you, Joe. And you were an advocate for us as well.
But Chris, when you were coming up and you were starting to play sports, was there any of that? Because Deirdre didn't have it because it was just what you did. But I know maybe it came later when the fuss came, as I think it was. There was a fuss.
Yeah, I mean, it started just when when I was really young, just hanging out in the neighborhood, just playing not like sports. We just played sports, and it was girls, and it was boys and girls. It wasn't just the boys. It was boys and girls, and we just threw the football around, played sports we lived near a cemetery, and we tried to avoid the tombstones and things like that. And that's where being athletic started. It wasn't official sports and things like that. And then, and then our sports didn't start until junior high school. I mean, I didn't do what all the kids do now when they're little and all that, all the, what's it called, all the, my parents we didn't do that. We didn't do all this. I didn't play until I was in junior high school.
Yeah, I mean, Little League and, Pee Wee.
I might have done Little League. I might have actually done Little League, but that was it. And then I really didn't play until I was in junior high school. But I just played.
And you needed your parents to support you. It wasn't like some people, they might want to go play sports and their mom or dad are like, that's not what you do. But you had parents that supported you, which I think is huge.
We're a huge sports fan family, and then, and that just transferred into me playing sports. And then, my whole family, we're very athletic. So it just was kind of just part of our entire, that's just what we did. It's just the whole culture of our family.
Kelly, did you have any kind of trepidation or any naysayers to say you can't do that?
No, and I'm going to bet that this whole panel is very similar in that we had supportive families who just said go play. And it's similar to Chris, but again, middle child, so maybe it's a little bit of both. I played softball, I played soccer, no offense, just for one, I didn't really like it. And but there weren't that many youth programs like she was saying. Like my kids started when they were 4 doing. Now that was old, and but it was junior high school when I started playing basketball, and high school when I started playing tennis, and I continually played multiple sports in high school. But in college that wasn't so much the case. I feel like now though, everyone's playing sports, but I feel like they're playing one sport. Yeah. And I don't think that's a good thing, and I kind of like how when I was growing up we would just all play different sports, and I think that might be where the change, and maybe you guys can speak to that a little bit, but the specialization that happens now is a little bit different. I know that's not exactly your question, but just my thoughts on that.
Maddie, when you think about it, you obviously got to see it on the national level, you got to see it in such a big stage, but being so good sometimes is threatening in and of itself with the male counterparts. They don't want to have the girl come out on there and beat you. And I'm sure, no offense to Brian, could you beat Brian? Yes, you could.
Maybe.
You
We went a
okay.
little further.
That's all right.
But,
And he's okay with it, which I think is great. But did you ever experience that? Like, just maybe not the backlash because you had the support, but of just people being like, oh, well, you just play girls soccer. That's not that good.
Yes, and then I invite them to a game and come watch. But yeah, I think for sure you definitely see and feel that. Oh, it's just girls. It's just that. But when you have some people who who are willing to step into that circle and see it and experience it, then that's when it changes. My dad, for example, he's always been a big sports fan. Now he's women's soccer through and through. You see it for what it is. But I think I see it more now as a coach and as a woman coach. And since Title IX, women coaching the women programs has actually decreased. So it's now about 40% of all women's programs in the NCAA are actually coached by women. And here at Westchester, we're fortunate to have a lot of women coaching women. Shout out to them in the room. We got a few. But I think that's where it is. When I think of the next step for Title IX, I think of the representation of women and diverse women in coaching roles and leading our women, because again, you have to see it in order to be able to eventually reach that. So I think that's kind of where my mind went once it starts to get talking to kind of like women in these roles, and whether it's coaching men or women.
Right.
So.
Yeah, that's a really good point, because you need women to be the coaches. And Juah, you said you're going to work with programs, and you mentioned the HBCUs. How important would it be for you to kind of lead a women's rugby program, whether it's at an HBCU or anywhere, just to show them that not only a woman can do this, but a woman of color can do this?
Yeah, I think that would be so cool. That same Howard team, I was invited out to a practice. I'm obviously still in school, so post-graduation in 30 days. I will try to thank you. I'll try to make my way up to DC just to talk to them about, my experience in rugby and why it's so important. I know, like I said before, Black women are obviously very criticized, so it can be hard to step out and want to play a sport in the first place when you're younger, because you feel like that's not for you, that's for your brothers, that's for your uncles. You see your dads, backyard football, all that stuff. And so for me, I actually liked sports a lot without anybody needing for me to like sports. So it's actually really funny. My mom wrote in her book about how when I was younger, my dad wanted me to play soccer, and my mom was like, no. And so obviously when I got to middle school, that's when my sports journey started, when I started playing. The first sport I picked up was track in 7th grade, and so I did that from 7th grade to 12th grade. Basketball was freshman year to senior year. Cheer was somewhere in there, and then field hockey for junior, senior year, because I was bored and I was like, let's pick up another one. And so one of the things that my mom talks about in her book is that I got to college, and for anyone who doesn't know, I decided to play rugby and signed up for rugby, got cleared, started practice without telling my parents. Because I was like, I'm 18, I'm grown, first year at Westchester, it's fine. So then I invite them out to a game, and also my parents are from Liberia, so they're African, they don't know what rugby is. So they come out to a game and they're like, what did you sign up for? And I'm like, listen. Hear me out, okay? I think I've really found my sport. Obviously, my mom many years ago was like, no to soccer, but could not stop the passion and the love for athletics, because then I picked up rugby, which I think she probably thinks is worse. Then she probably should have just let me play soccer when I was like 8. And maybe I would have specialized in that instead of rugby. So we laugh about it to this day.
I'm enjoying the laughter that's coming from it, because it's a nervous laughter, I think, a little bit from your family up here.
Yeah, so I have an older brother, and he would tell me that she's not well on the sideline. And obviously rugby is a high-intensity sport. We tackle quite often. My position, I tackle quite often. So her seeing me at any point, she's just unwell on the sideline, hoping that I just get up from every tackle. So my journey to rugby has been really interesting. My journey to sport has been really interesting. And I think, at first the hesitancy with just soccer was also met with go ahead and do whatever you want as long as you're passionate about it. So I had a natural passion for sports, which not everybody does when they are 13 or 12. But I also was allowed to have that passion and just kind of pick up things as I went and not have a problem with it. So I did have a very supportive support system back then and now when I got to college and after.
Is your mom the one that's been going like this?
Yes, she's right here in the front.
Would you like to tell us a little bit about how this journey was for you guys? Jim's going to come up. It's just interesting because your daughter goes to college one day and then she comes back and saying, I not only am I a Division I athlete about a sport that I never saw, you definitely never saw, and I'm going to hit people.
Well, Juah been in a lot of sports from the time she was in middle school and high school. But for the fact that we are from Africa, and me personally, for some reason, I felt like a woman should not be playing, what is the name? Soccer, okay, or football. So she played everything else besides soccer. She played tennis. She went to what else? Field hockey. She played everything, but soccer, no. So she came to Westchester, and she signed herself up. Only because she felt like she was 18 years old.
Grown, fully grown apparently.
And she didn't need my signature. And this day came and she said that we should come to see her play. Well, I didn't know what rugby was all about. I thought it was something else. And I came and I saw them hitting my girl on the ground. And I was like, whoa. Wow. As she is going on the ground, I'm going on the ground, and I asked my husband, I said, but what is that? I asked my son, why are they putting her on the ground? And then I heard the girls, tackle her, tackle her. And then my son said, tackle her, knock her down. I am the Lord Jesus. My daughter is going to get hurt. After the game was over, I asked her, I said, Juah, why did you get yourself into that thing? She said, Mom, it's a game. I said, how did you get in it? She said, I signed myself up. But as time went on, the fear got out of me. And then I saw that it was her passion. Behold, she grew up. She grew up to be an Ncaa
national champion, Women of the Year finalist, all those great things. To add on to this journey, during our national championship game, my brother tells me, because obviously I wasn't next to her, that she goes from obviously like being very scared that I'm going to get hurt to yelling, knock her down. Juah, knock her down. My brother's like, you can't say that. Say tackle, but you can't say like knock that girl down. You know, that's a little aggressive. And she's like, okay.
And just
that was at the championship game.
Harvard.
Harvard University.
Yes.
I was like, knock her down, Juah. Knock her down. And he said, no, mommy, you can't say knock her down. Say tackle her.
It's much friendlier. Yes. Much friendlier.
If I may interject, I've never been shy. Just as the fear came out of you and you realized it's a passion, hopefully Title IX helped the fear come out of our culture as a nation. And we can realize that it's a passion that's within women as well as it is within men for athletics.
Thank you, Mr. and Mrs. Toe. For I also like you're soccer. I like that you were giving her the cues there during her story. Are there any other questions out there that anybody has? Yeah. Oh yes. Hi. Yeah, please state your name, ma'am.
You got jokes.
Ma'am, can you stand up, ma'am? You're kind of short.
Oh my gosh. You know what? Hi. I'm Kiara Wood, and I'm the women's basketball coach here.
Shout out.
So this question is not actually from me. This is from one of your former players, but it's for the entire panel. The question is, how do you feel about transgender athletes competing on women's teams in terms of how it relates to Title IX?
This is obviously, this is obviously a question that's come to the forefront because of Leah Thomas over at Penn, swimming. If you don't know the story, I recommend to Google. But it's an interesting question because it's just like, and not in any way, shape, or form, like the NAL, but it is a gray area that we have no idea how to navigate. I think it's something that universities are going to do on a case-by-case basis. But Deirdre, do you want to tackle that?
I can go first because, as always, I have opinions. First, I'll preface it. There are so many other problems where women's sports need help. I do believe that the transgender issue is not going to be an issue. I believe that there are people who see just the whole transgender world as an issue that want to make it an issue. For example, one thing that's always been a pet peeve of mine is male practice players. Okay, all those wonderful schools you see in the March Madness for women, they don't practice against other women. They practice against men. So on their bench, you only see a squad depth of about 10, 11 people when there are 15 scholarships to give. So that's 4 scholarships that aren't being given out because they all want to practice against men. That's more of a problem to me than the one trans woman that wants to compete. Now, is that a terrible thing for that athlete that comes in second place? Maybe, but think of how many women are denied those spots on those Division I teams because they think practicing against men will make us better. Well, it is women's basketball, and maybe we should get the best women we can find to practice against to make it completely women's basketball. Do I think the NCAA took the easy way out by saying, I think we'll leave that up to all the governing bodies of the individual sports? Darn tootin', but they've never been known for their courage. And I'm glad I'm not a decision maker because I am as inclusive as they come, but this is a tough nut. And just like the NCAA doesn't hesitate to make rules about other things, oh, you have to sit out, you have to wait this long, you have to do that, maybe there should be some legislation about sitting out till a certain amount of time goes by after transitioning. I mean, it's a pretty tough pill to swallow to be competing on the men's Division I level 1 year, and correct me if I'm wrong in my timeline, and then the very next year, 2 years? 2 years to be competing on the women's Division I level. So it's definitely an area that I'm glad I'm not the decision maker for, but far be it from me to ever exclude anyone an opportunity because I've been given all the opportunities because of other people that went ahead of me. And to make it an issue, the people that are speaking out the loudest about this is pure opinion, are the people who really didn't care about women's sports before. So what are they really afraid of?
And I agree. I think it is blown up into something that doesn't affect most people, but the people who are making it into the biggest deal, you said, didn't really pay attention before. And I think, not to shout out the NCAA, but I do think that they are placed at a very difficult position. And being into some meetings and committee meetings and listening to how they're making these decisions, they're trying to be fair. They're trying to be equitable for everybody, the transgender athlete, everyone else on the team, and it's very difficult, and there's not a lot of science behind this. And I think that's the key thing right there is there's just not a lot of research, and so they're really just going with what they have. And the one thing I did learn was that it really takes like 3 years to get bodies to change. Like Leah Thomas would have to wait 3 years, and it's currently just 1 year of treatment. So, but college sports doesn't give you 3 years, not in that way. So there's a lot of different ways to navigate this, and I think we're just kind of in the beginning. But I do think that people are really taking a stance, not because I worry about the women's sports or I worry about the girls' sports, but because I have an agenda or an idea of other people that I'm merely not.
Kelly, I admire your loyalty to the NCAA, and that speaks that speaks well for Title IX too, because I came up in AIAW, and it was a big thing. We didn't want to switch to NCAA. We thought, well, they've ignored us all these years, you know, and it took 10 full years. But the fact that you're a product now of good things that happened from Title IX, because we all are under one governing body now, and that's best for women. It really was. It was tough for us to admit it first, but it was the best.
And I will say the NCAA does not have to meet Title IX. They're not an educational institution, but they are really, you know, they have really good people who work there who are trying to educate and make everybody from high school on up to college understand what Title IX is and what the effect it has on women's sports today. So I think their heart's in the right place.
Yeah, because they've started hiring women.
See, there you go. And I think the question is, and to kind of sum up what both Kelly and Deirdre are saying, is that it seems like people are using this as their pet project for whatever political gain that they may or may not want to try to push, or their agenda. And they're asking the questions like, well, Maddie, what if a guy wanted to join your program? Okay, what if a guy wanted to join? You know, it's such a difficult thing, because they're basically trying to get you to say something as opposed to think about the real science behind it, or the realistic, you know, opportunity. You know, is there an opportunity? Maybe you'll have a transgender athlete that tries to join a women's sport, but they'll have to go through the different, you know, rules and regulations just like any other athlete, but obviously they've got more. But it's interesting, they'll just be like, oh, well, how would you feel if a guy tried to join you? Well, yeah, okay, wouldn't be a guy though. That's where you have to really think about. So it's an interesting kind of, I guess it's a whole new forefront. And really, I mean, the world's at a whole new forefront when you think about it. Everything's changing, and people's views are changing, and they're evolving. So I'm hoping that they get to a place where they can start having some kind of hard and fast rules about this, because it's not going to be just Leah Thomas. There's going to be other transgender athletes in all sports. And if they want to play the sport, they should be allowed to, obviously under the same rules that any other athlete would have to adhere to. I think that that's really what makes sport. Listen, you can't just go out there and pick up the ball when you're playing basketball, as much fun as it would be, and just go right to the hoop and without dribbling. There's rules in everything, and I think that's really what's going to make the difference in this case. And it'll be something to really watch, I think, with a keen eye. But that's a good question, Key. I don't know who asked it, but it was a good question. Well, all right, whoever text you read, I appreciate that. Is there any other questions? I think we're going to wrap up here in a little bit, but shout out to the women's rugby. You guys are all women's rugby? Shout out women's rugby. Juah was talking about her support. They're all right here in the front. There's so many people here tonight that have, you know, experienced Title IX, and I'm so glad for you guys for sharing your stories as well. You easily could have been up here on this stage, and I think that's really important. I think representation. Oh, you have a question? Oh, you're just going to shout it out. Okay. I like it.
So I played lacrosse at Penn State from 1978 to 1981, and I didn't have that feeling that we were treated real differently. I may have taken a little bit of time, but by the time I was a freshman, there were 12 of us on full scholarship. So they did it pretty well at a time where there was a lot of transition. We won 3 national championships at that time, and they were USWL, it wasn't NCAA. We didn't care. And we really were treated, for as early as it was through that transition, I felt like I rode a wave, you know, that was in my benefit. So I never felt less than. So I just want to make sure that I think some people's experience at that time period was very different. I think it depended where you were, and it may have depended the sport that you played. So I don't think everything may have been equal, but my experience may have been different from someone else's in the late 70s and early 80s.
I think that's probably true in 2022. Yeah. Right? You go to a different university and you hear how you guys probably experience it when you go play somebody and you're looking around and you're like, oh, well, this is a different place. Look at this facility. Look at this gym. And that's true for a lot of things. I think it's your own experience. You know, obviously you make the most of it. I think one thing I came away from all of these women is they all wanted to play sports. They all wanted to play. and they all were given the opportunity. And I think that's really at its core what Title IX is. That opportunity, that's all people are asking for, is the opportunity to play. The support system, whether it's from home or on the collegiate level or at the high school or at the middle school level, the support to play, to support those dreams so you can achieve whatever it is. You know, Juah said she didn't know that this whole world existed, but it opened up a whole new world to you. Maddie, I don't know, did you know that you would be doing what you were doing if you hadn't had the soccer experience?
No.
Exactly. Think about it. I mean, it opens up so much. These women are now athletic administrators. Deirdre, you went to school to become a vet. You are not a vet. You are a college basketball coach. So, I mean, it's funny how sports can change people's lives so much for the better. And I think we all kind of resonate with the camaraderie and the sense of, you know, the sorority of it, you know, the sisterhood. I think that's really important. That's something that women, I think we really enjoy. We enjoy being around other women and lifting each other up, especially in times where that's not always easy because you're told you can't do things, or you should be in the kitchen, or you can't do that for a job. You're not supposed to be a psychologist or a psychiatrist. That's a men's sport. You can't be an engineer. What in the world? You know, it's science for men. So I think that sports really helps women achieve different things. The achievements that you see from women that play sports and the level of education that they were able to achieve because of sports is one of the things that I think is really great about Title IX. Because you heard me read off their accolades. There's not a woman up here that doesn't have at least 2 degrees. Sorry, Deirdre. You would have if you know, obviously it was at a different time, but you guys all have your masters and your doctorates. I mean, it's almost 30 days, Juah, 30 days, you got your. So I think that that's something, when you think about it, you know, there are some positives, a lot of positives, and I thought that was something that I came away with, and I thought, you know, you guys are so accomplished, and sports were such an integral part of that.
Amy, I know you're trying to wrap it up. One thing that was brought up right before this, that I want to throw it out for everyone to think about. Do you think that it's a product of Title IX that we've gone from women athletes as girls being overall athletes, playing multiple sports, to now feeling as though they need to specialize? Do you think it's a product of Title, and I'm kind of throwing it out because I think that's a concern of mine. That's a real concern of mine, not from just overtraining, looking at athletic trainers here, right here, you know, not from overtraining to just the pressure to the, and I know Maddie was extremely successful, specialized in soccer, you know, to the point where that's what you might need to do to become a professional soccer player. But I just think that, you know, you talked about all the positives, tons of positives of Title IX, but I wonder if that's one potential negative, that now little girls feel as though they need to specialize from the time they're little. I need to pick a sport, and that's my sport, and that's all I'm going to do. And we've lost the overall, you know, the little girls being able to just play all kinds of sports and not specialize. And I just think that that might be something that just is not such a positive thing that's happened as a result.
Maddie, did you play more than once? Did you only play soccer in high school?
No, I played 4 different sports.
Okay.
Lacrosse, track.
Do you feel that now, though? Do you see it at all?
I do feel that there is a pressure to specialize if you want to reach a certain level. And I think that at the end of the day, the word passion came out a few times today. If you're in sport because you love it and you love being active and you love all the intangible pieces that come from playing, you're going to get that. So as long as coaches and people who are supporting the athletes in sport are really highlighting that aspect of it, I feel like that's the most important piece. And while of course specialization has to happen and that pressure does come, I still think we're reaping the benefits of the work ethic, of the leadership, of the teamwork, of the camaraderie. Those are coming. So it's a tough thing, and I think every coach will have a different perspective on whether it's good or bad or whatnot. I love soccer players that play basketball, so I love soccer players that run track. So it all depends on how you look at it, but definitely certain that something that is moving towards more and more specialization.
Yeah, that's a really good point, because it could be something. Oh, you have something? Yeah. really good. If you guys couldn't hear, she was talking about how she played a bunch, and then all of a sudden you get to be really good at collegiate rugby, or at the rugby level, and you're thinking, if I want to play this at the collegiate level, I'm going to have to only focus on that. You don't see that as much at the male level. You do see it, obviously, but I think for the women level, it's just about trying to get that scholarship maybe, and they want to make sure that they can be the best, and that's also pressure that they put on themselves. It might go back to kind of that support system, whether it's the institutional or your high school or your coaches or anybody at that kind of ground roots level to still encourage you. But it's, they worry about, I don't want to injure myself in basketball season for soccer. You hear about that quite a bit. So it is something to kind of watch in the future to see if they just stop playing them altogether. Bill Swan, what you got for me?
Maybe like the coaches at our level, we don't want our kids.
No, you don't want them playing baseball.
Our field hockey coach does not want
No.
her players playing lacrosse, which is what they all used to do years ago. Well, right now, the field hockey coach does not want them playing lacrosse. They can't really. It's all year round.
Yeah, it is interesting.
So at a certain level, it becomes that way. It is becoming that way for women now, but it's been that way for men for a long time.
Yeah.
And that's just the way that's because women's sports have grown to that
Yeah, and that's maybe a testament to their popularity because they have grown to that level, and now they are having to focus like the men. Like a guy would have to drop baseball because he was playing, football, and he wasn't going to get hurt, and then their off-season programs would overlap.
I don't think we were talking about specialization on the college level. I think that's a given. We're talking when is that time that specialization has to occur? And women's basketball with AAU and everything that starts, they don't, if they want to be seen. Yeah. Soccer, it's,
Okay.
I think it's kind of a money thing. I mean, it's a catch-22, right? The Title IX brings more money to the female athletes, which is definitely a need. But even for all of us in this audience, right, we all have the money that we pay ourselves for our children or our parents made for us as athletes, right? It's all about the money. How much money is there to spend? How much time is there to spend? I have one child. I have a neighbor who has three that are all athletes. I had to pick up their kids at practices sometimes, or kids in the practices because they're doing soccer, they're doing every sport under the sun, and it's hard. And it gets to the point, especially when you get to middle school or junior high school and higher, and then the coaches will say the same thing. You have to specialize. We have some basketball players on our middle school team who didn't play all season because they hurt their ankles playing soccer or track or whatever. So they played the last game of the season, really hurt them. Next year going into the high school season, hopefully, we'll have a strong team. But I think it's the money chain really that kind of plays into this as to why it becomes a single sport. Where the AAU team is here right now, and it's becoming AAU seasons in the spring. There's league play in the early fall. There's winter sports, and there's summer basketball. It's 4 season sports.
Exactly. That's the thing. You're running out of time. You don't have any more months to pick up another sport or continue it, or money, because you're going to all these tournaments, you're signing up with the uniforms. And so it is interesting because it does start to kind of really streamline into one sport when you become a really good athlete, which is unfortunate because you should still have as many opportunities. But that'll be something interesting to watch. I mean, it's a good problem to have, but it's a dangerous problem because then you'll have less eventually. It'll begin to weed itself out too much. I know we want to wrap up. Oh, we have, yes. Oh, wait. No, go ahead.
Where does that come from? Because where does that start? Who's the one that's pushing those kids? Because if I'm correct, and I could be wrong on this, but I thought during the football bubble, I heard that the last 4 quarterbacks that were left in the NFL playoffs were all 3-sport athletes in high school.
Oh, yes.
Now, if that's the case,
Well, there is no AAU in football.
professional athletes that can play 3 sports in high school. Why is my 9-year-old grandson playing travel baseball in Florida
Right.
in August? And who's doing that?
Yeah, well, it's, to go back, it's also a money thing because those AAU companies all generate money. They're not nonprofits, let's be honest, right, AAU. But football, it doesn't have an AAU. There isn't, so it's a little bit, but if you talk to any of those NBA basketball players, they might have started playing a little bit. LeBron James was all state. He was all state 2 years. First 2 years they ever played football. After his sophomore year, they were like, listen, you got to pick one. And he picked basketball. He could have played. Notre Dame offered him a college scholarship, and he hadn't even played the last 2 years. That's how good he was. Right, but it's the same. But you take that down to that level. So when you're looking at it, if they become really good at it, they know I have to play on this. Oh, then you hear, oh, there's another tournament. Well, I got to get in that tournament because they've got those scouts, and they're going to get to the next AAU program. It's just a slippery slope. And when you have these, which is hilarious because AAU, the A stands for amateur, which may or may not be true. But I think it's one of those things. Go ahead, Maddie.
Oh,
I thought you raised your hand.
Oh, no, I was just saying, I think definitely in the club environment. So you have your high school teams and you can play your high school sports. But in the club environment is where it starts to get very specialized and the pressure's put on to, okay, you have to be at practice these nights, you have to be at these tournaments, but it makes it impossible to do many more things. So I think you do see some athletes who can play multiple sports in high school, but then are specializing more in their sport in the club environment outside.
Do you find the recruiting was bigger in your club when you would go to your club events?
Absolutely.
Yeah, and that's where it is. Because they're not coming to high school soccer, they're going to the club
by
soccer.
Sport as well.
Yeah,
so some
obviously, yeah.
Yes.
AAU, you hear that, he had a great camp in the summer camp. They didn't necessarily watch him in their, school program. So I think that's it. I mean, it's just about, it's kind of one of those, is it the chicken or the egg? Is it because the recruiting system is based on the club level, or is the club level based on the recruiting system? I mean, that's really, it'll be interesting to see. That's a really good question. All the way in the back, our final question.
Yeah, my name is Kyle McGee. I'm the men's basketball team here.
Hi, Kyle.
Before we end things, I just wanted to give a shout out to Dr. Karpinski. Say thank you for everything that you have done this year.
So nice.
Thank you, Kyle.
That was so nice of Kyle. Thanks for coming. Well, that's a great note to end on. Thank you, Kyle. I want to thank all of our panelists here, Juah, Maddie, Kelly, Chris, Deirdre. I think this was a really wonderful discussion. Thank you to sharing your story. Thank you to the women who played at Temple and Penn State for sharing your stories. I just think this is such an important thing. It's hard to believe it's been 50 years. I think sometimes it feels like it's been less, and maybe sometimes it feels like it's been longer because it's been so slow to kind of really come to fruition. But I want to thank all of you guys for being here and for joining us for this Title IX chat as the 50-year anniversary is for Title IX. Thanks, everyone.